I'm making this video to tell you about how the US government is going broke and how we're running out of time, but we can still do something to prevent it. And the main reason the government is going broke is because their debt is too high. It's 38 trillion right now. It's increasing by 2 trillion every year. They're paying 1.4 trillion in interest every year. So basically, they're borrowing to pay the interest, and they give too much. The government gives too much tax cuts. So now even less money is coming in, and more money is coming out, and at some point that is unsustainable. And as you see on the financial markets, Japan is selling its dollars and government bonds, and China is selling its dollars and government bonds, and all in all, the faith in the US government being able to repay its debt is shrinking, and Donald Trump is doing everything he can to reduce this faith in the US government even more, because Donald Trump is just spending and giving tax cut to his friends and rich, and it's just all piling up. And that wouldn't be so bad. And this situation could go on longer if it were not for the fact that we're in a perfect storm. Because economically, a lot of things are happening and they're not good. And if you add them all up, it's going to lead to the US government going broke. So what else is happening apart from the huge US debt? Well, the dollar is very weak, and it just lost 10% of its value, and Donald Trump is doing everything he can to make it lose even more value, because to him that's advantageous. His debt is in dollars, and if the value of the dollar decreases, then his debt decreases. So on a macro level, it's a good thing. The only problem is that for ordinary people, it's a disaster, because when the dollar is weak, they can buy less abroad, and so all the stuff you import gets more expensive, which feeds the inflation for the American consumer. It is advantageous for export because American goods become cheaper for other countries to buy. So for the government, it works. The only thing is, it just adds and adds to the already rising inflation for ordinary people. And ordinary people are not doing well financially. Wages haven't gone up in a long time, and these past years, the inflation has just gone through the roof, and a lot of American consumers are in debt. Well, that is the American way. You borrow money to buy a car and buy a house and buy appliances and all the trimmings of a consumer society. So that in itself is not unusual. What is unusual that a lot of these credit card debts and car loans are not given by the banks, but by private credit companies, which are not obliged to hold a certain amount of money in the bank in case people can't, as a buffer um, against defaults. So it's a very precarious situation, and the inflation has become so high and the wages so low that estimates are that 50% of the American people, and that is 50, that is 50%, are using their credit cards to buy groceries and pay the rent, which means they're basically living above their means, getting deeper and deeper into debt, which is why Trump wants to cap a credit card debt at 10%, because some consumers are paying 20% interest rates on credit card debt they use to pay the rent or to buy groceries. So estimates are that by the end of this year, a lot of people are going to max out their credit cards and won't be able to make their monthly payment and on their credit card, on their car loans, and even on their mortgages. And so they're going to default. And estimates are it could be between 30 and 50%, that's 30 and 50% of the credit card holders and consumers who are going to default and won't be able to make their monthly payments. And if that happens, the credit card companies and the banks are going to go broke. They're going to fail. There's no way they can default on even 10% of their loans. So if 30%, 40% stop paying the monthly payments, the whole thing collapses. And it is exactly the same thing that happened in 2008. And the people stop paying the monthly payments for the debt and subsequently for their mortgages. And then the banks are going to go broke. Now, the thing is, in 2008, when a massive amount of people defaulted on their mortgages, and the banks couldn't absorb the losses because they were selling the houses at very low prices, so they couldn't recoup their loans. At that point, the government intervened and they bailed out the banks. Only this time they won't, because in order for the government to bail out the banks, they have to borrow money, because it's going to cost them trillions to bail out the banks. The only thing is, the US government is up to here in debt, and it cannot borrow any more. So whatever happens in the economy, they will not be able to bail out the banks, credit companies, or any other company or business. So they will fail, and then a whole chain of banks will fail, and the whole system collapses. When too many banks fail, small banks, then the big banks, and then the financial institutions, and then the stock exchange goes, and the whole thing tumbles down the hill, and we're in a new Great Depression. And it is ironic that it's going to happen 100 years after the first Great Depression in 1929. So we're almost at 2029, and we're on the brink. Because the whole point of this story is that because government debt is so high, they can hardly make their own monthly payments. They cannot borrow money to bail out any bank, any business, or anything that fails or goes wrong in the economy. But it's not just consumer debt and car loans. It's also commercial properties. And Warren Buffett warns for this, that and a lot of commercial property right now is not rented. And this is a result of COVID. A lot of office workers are staying on working from home. A lot of small businesses went broke during COVID and are now coming back to rent these commercial properties. So the situation with the commercial properties is very bad. There's a lot of it empty and not collecting rent, but they were built with large loans. And these loans have to be paid back, or at least the monthly payments have to be made. And if there's not enough income through rent, then the commercial property owners, the businesses, won't be able to make their monthly payments. And there we go again. The banks who hold the loans won't be able to compensate for such a big loss because there's so much commercial properties empty right now and not making money. So the banks are going to go broke on the commercial property loans, not just on the consumer loans. And there we go again. The government can't bail them out. So we have again this cascade effect through the whole economy. And apart from that, the financial system is not making as much money as they used to. First of all, 2 years ago, the petrodollar died, which before there was a deal with OPEC and the oil countries that whenever oil was bought or sold somewhere in the world by somebody, it will be in dollars. That's why they call it the petrodollar. Now, 2 years ago, this obligation ended and people can buy and sell oil in whatever currency they want. So China is buying in yuans or euros or whatever. So a lot of demand for dollars by foreign countries is going down because they don't need those dollars anymore to pay for the oil. So, and then the BRICS countries last December started their own international banking exchange system. Now, the global system is SWIFT, and any transaction, international transaction between any country is done through the SWIFT system, which is a computer system, basically, very basic, by the way, and it is run through the American financial institutions, and they take a piece of the pie. So the American financial institutions and banks are making a lot of money because everybody has to go through them to make international payments. And then China and the BRICS said, well, we're not going to do that. So in December, they introduced their own system, and now China, Russia, Brazil, all of the BRICS countries, Saudi Arabia, are not going through the SWIFT system anymore. They have their own system. So about half the world's trade that used to be done through the US is no longer passing by. So the American banks just lost half their income on these transactions. And it also means that for international transaction, not oil, but buying or selling other products, people can go through SWIFT, so they don't need dollars. So a lot of countries don't need dollars anymore. They can do it in euros, they can do it in yuans, they can do it through the BRICS system. actually the US is being pushed out of the international trade community, and the way Trump is alienating all his friends, that is not helping. You know, a lot of old friends like Canada, like Europe, is pulling out of the US and no longer trading with them or rerouting their trade routes to avoid the US. So that is costing a lot of companies a lot of income, and that means less taxes. So if all these dollars are coming back to the United States, which they are, the value of the dollar will go down even more, which will increase the inflation, which will increase the problems consumers have of just buying groceries, and the consumers go broke. So another thing that is happening is that because faith in the US government to repay its debt or even its interest payments is going down, and they already lost their AAA status, a lot of countries are selling their government treasury bonds. China is selling their US bonds, Japan, and it is in the hundreds of billions they're selling their bonds. They are giving the debt back to the US. The European Union pulling up for hundreds of billions. Japan is going for $1 trillion. All that money is being poured back into the US, and the US can't absorb that. So what is happening if a lot of people start selling government bonds, and huge amounts of them, like hundreds of billions into the trillions, then the value of government bonds will go down. And that is already happening. So it's even more difficult for the US to borrow money. Trump is blackmailing the Fed to not raise interest rates, otherwise the government will be in trouble on that as well. And what's really worrying is that not just foreign countries are selling their bonds. BlackRock just sold a few $100 billion of government bonds, and they actually sold it at a loss. Now, if a big company like BlackRock is selling its government bonds and selling dollars, which they are as well, if basically BlackRock is pulling out of US government debt, they know something that we should know, because they are definitely losing faith in the US ability to pay its debt. And that is, those are very clear signs. You know, if the big boys start selling in bulk, maybe they're sending us a message, which is also the reason, because Japan and China are also buying gold, as is BlackRock. They're buying metals, but they're buying gold, real gold bars. And that is usually a sign that people are getting very nervous, and they do not trust the currency, and they do not trust the government bonds. They just go for 100% security, so they buy gold, and they're hoarding their assets and hunkering down for the storm, and that is not a good sign. That should tell us something. That should tell us that they know something we need to know. So And then look at the stock market. Everybody says there's an AI bubble. There's going to be some kind of adjustment of the market. A lot of AI companies are overvalued. So, there's going to be some adjustment to its real value. And they call it the AI bubble. And if that burst in the normal situation, they predict that the stock exchange will drop about 10%, and a lot of people will lose a lot of money, but it'll be an adjustment, and then the air is out of the bubble and we can move on. But if suddenly a lot of stocks are losing value, and a lot of people lose money, and that can also be a trigger to or an adding factor in this cascade of disasters and this storm that is coming on. So if the stock exchange goes, it's the same kind of problem. Either way, whatever domino falls first, consumer debt, commercial property, AI bubble, the global financial system avoiding the US, whatever happens, it's going to be a cascade, because the US government cannot bail out anybody because they're too much in debt. So at that point, when the banks fail or the stock exchange fails or something fails, then the US government will be pulled along. And when the US government goes broke, well, everything ends. That is basically the 1929 Great Depression scenario, which means that a whole lot of companies, most of the companies will go broke, which means that most people will lose their job, which means they won't be able to pay taxes because they're on their job, because they don't have a job. And government expenses will go up because they'll be asking for welfare. And long lines at the soup kitchen, and it's done. And unfortunately, the US will probably pull down with him his trade partners and friends like Canada and the European Union, because the European Union holds a lot of government bonds. And if they're smart, they sell them while they're still worth something, And you also hear Buffett and the other stock exchange gurus that they're saying liquidize. And there's a bear coming with the AI bubble. There's too many consumers. There's too many consumer debt, too high government debt. Get out now while the going is good, and liquidize and buy gold and silver and wait out the storm. And if the big boys are telling you this, maybe you should listen. Maybe there's really something going on. And everybody after 1929, they all said, well, we knew it was coming. We knew the bear was coming. We knew the stock prices would fall, but we all thought we would be able to get out in time. And we are at this point right now, which is the reason the gold price is like shooting through the roof. It is so high. It's incredible. So, and then people will say, well, the GDP is still growing. The economy is fine. And well, no, because the GDP is only rising because there's the AI bubble, and a lot of money is being poured into construction of data centers. So all the construction and all the increase in GDP, the growth of the GDP, is 100% on the building of data centers because of the AI bubble. If you take the AI out of it, the GDP has grown zero. In fact, production and construction in the US has gone down the past year. So actually, if you take away AI and the data centers, the economy is starting to shrink, and you can see unemployment is rising every month. More and more and more people are losing their job. And it's going slowly, but it's there. So no, the GDP, the economy is not well. So when you look at society, when you look at the broader picture, and say, why is this happening? How did we get to this point? Well, we've been slowly moving towards it for ever since the 80s, when Reagan, Thatcher, and the whole neoliberal economics theory became king, and we embraced it. And neoliberalism says that you have to leave it up to the market, and the market will take care of us, and the government should pull out, and the market should take over. And greed is good. Capitalism is the best possible system, and there should be a free market, no regulation, and the big companies shouldn't be bothered with paying taxes. So you see this change from post-war Keynes thinking of the government should support and stimulate the economy and the growing of the middle class and consumer society and the increase in wealth by the United States. And then in the 80s, this all changed and we went neoliberal. And there was massive deregulation, there was massive tax cuts on the rich and the big companies. And this created this K-shaped economy. And that sounds very official, but what it basically means is that the gap between rich and poor is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because the government is pulling back and they're not going to do anything about the distribution of wealth. And what has happened since Reagan is that the tax cuts for the rich have come to a point where the rich and the big companies don't pay any taxes at all. The only people in the United States who pay taxes are the poor slobs who have a job, and they pay 30% of their salary to the government. So the government is taxing the poor, but not the rich, and the gap between rich and poor is widening and widening. And because the stock exchange kept on growing, and especially these past 30 years, people haven't been worried that much because a lot of people are in the stock market, if especially with their pensions and stuff like that, with investments, but basically with their pensions. And as long as the stock market is going up, everybody's happy. They think they're rich. But you're actually rich on a pin. That is a very fragile basis to put your riches on, because the stock exchange can drop in one day and you lose your whole pension. It is to have all your eggs in one basket, to have all your whole pension, all your savings in the stocks, means that you're very vulnerable, and when it goes, you go as well. That is why a lot of people like Jeffrey Sachs and Stiglitz and all the major companies and economists are saying, if you're in the stock market, broaden your portfolio, liquidize part of it, sell stocks to buy gold and other assets which will retain their value, and a reduced amount of government bonds. So here you have the result. The reason why people are giving this advice to people who have their pension on the stock exchange is exactly what I explained before. They're telling people, sell your stocks, go into cash, go into savings accounts, go into gold, and reduce your stocks and your government bonds. But anyway, the reason, so a lot of people are not worried because the stock exchange is still very high. It just passed 50,000, which is enormous. But if you look at the last Great Depression, what happened was that a lot of people were borrowing money, buying stocks. The stocks went up, they made money. And the whole decade of the 20s, the stock exchange rose and rose and rose and rose and rose, and everybody was happy and everybody was borrowing, and the roaring 20s, and everybody thought it would never end, and it did in October 29. So if the ordinary people, if their wealth and their assets is just in the stock exchange, and their saving and pensions are all in the stock exchange, and your house is mortgaged to the hilt, and you have a loan, a credit for your car, then you are extremely vulnerable in case something happens, because the stock market is very sensitive, and even if only a little thing happens in the economy or in the world, it could just suddenly crash and you lose everything. So my first advice, like all the others, like Warren Buffett, like all the others, is telling people, get out of the stocks or diversify. Sell part of your stocks, sell part of your bonds, put it in cash, gold and metals, and pay off as much of your debt as possible, because you're going to be in real trouble if you lose money. and then won't be able to pay off your debt. And that is exactly true. Very true for people who own their house and who have a mortgage. You should try and save your house in case the economy turns bad. So back to the gap and the K-shaped economy. That is actually the reason we're so much in trouble. Not just because over the past 40 years, the rich have gone richer and the poorer have gone poorer. And when I say the rich, let me just call them the 1%. Because it's not just one rich guy, it's rich people and the big companies. Basically, big tech, big pharma, the military industrial complex, Lockheed, BlackRock, the big financial institutions. And what you have seen happen these past 20, 30 years is that not only has the gap between rich and poor widened, and a lot of the middle class is sliding down into the poor, and the rich have gone richer and they pay less and less and less money. But also a lot of small businesses have failed or been bought by the big companies. So they have failed during COVID, which has speeded up the process of there being no more small businesses, just a handful of really big ones. And they have the monopoly on the market. And that means that they can raise their prices as much as they want because they are monopolists. So in the next video, I will explain why the government is going broke while this is happening in the real economy.